Hello and welcome, folks. I'm Kai Nagata. Thank you for joining our workshop today with Alexandra Woodsworth and Cheryl Cameron from Dogwood. Hey, folks.
Hi there.
And thank you, Jamie, who, as always, will be running the Zoom platform today. Just to flag that this session is being recorded for people who can't make it, and I see more people joining now, so feel free to introduce yourself in the chat as you're joining. So we are here tonight because after 9 years of fighting this thing, 2 premiers, 2 prime ministers, 1 giant taxpayer bailout, a global pandemic, epic court battles, and many false starts, Trans Mountain is ramping up construction on its pipeline and oil tanker expansion on a scale that we haven't seen before. But they have a long way to the finish line. And at the same time, we're seeing a surge of events, actions, and new energy in the fight to stop TMX. You've seen the tent hanging in the cottonwoods next to the Brunette River in Burnaby. Another march today to Kukwetsnuktuk, the watch house in Burnaby. People have blocked work camps, heavy machinery, and giant drills right across BC. And in the last 2 weeks, we've seen Indigenous youth in Vancouver challenging multinational insurance companies, blockading the port, demanding the release of Indigenous elders from jail, and facing police brutality in response.
Hi, everyone. So after a year of being stuck at home while contractors are rushing to build oil and gas mega projects, workers are getting killed and badly injured and spreading COVID in local communities, folks have had enough. People are coming together to find safe ways to organize on the ground, real world actions, coming from a broad spectrum of strategies, tactics, and groups, linking into and out of amazing movements. And it's so exciting to see all this energy happening. And I really think this momentum is only going to grow as weather warms up, more people are vaccinated. We're just going to see more and more of this. So yeah, super exciting. And what we've been hearing from a lot of folks out there, a lot of Dogwood supporters, is there's so much happening. How can I stay up to date? Who's who in all this? How can I find out when the next event is happening? How can I support, whether I live in the Lower Mainland or somewhere else? So, what we're doing tonight, we're not speaking for the organizers of all these amazing events that are happening, but we want to make sure as many people as possible can connect directly with those out there on the ground, find events and projects that fit with what they can do, and find a way to support and get involved. And that's what this evening is all about.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cheryl Cameron. I'm Director of Organizing with Dogwood, for those of you I don't know. So as Alexandra said, what we're offering today is really our best understanding of what's happening based on our relationships and networks. So much of what we'll be talking about tonight was brought together during the People's Assembly, which was hosted by Protect the Planet, Stop TMX and other allies. So we'll be following up after this webinar with links to the videos that you see tonight, the photos that we share, and with contact information for all the local organizers and how to engage with Dogwood teams and events. So there's sure to be gaps in what we're offering tonight. And I'm sure that on this call tonight, there are people who are going to be able to fill in some of those gaps. So I invite you to go ahead and use the chat to post any other TMX related events that we have not covered or may not cover, and we will be sure to include all the information in the chat in our follow-up emails. So with that, Trans Mountain has described this coming year as the year of peak construction. We'll see about that. As we know, it ain't over till it's over, and they've got a long, long way to go. And there's a lot of people who are working to oppose this project. So one way or another, it's going to be an intense year on the ground. So let's dive in.
Yeah, it's great to see so many folks joining, and we're curious where in BC you are joining from. Obviously, where you are affects the kinds of tactics and actions that you can join on short notice. So we're going to put up a little survey that you can answer over the next few minutes here in Zoom, just to let us know where you're joining us from tonight. So I'm speaking to you from Giksand Territory in northern BC, but I did live most of my life in East Vancouver and Burnaby, on the territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, who bear the biggest risks in all of this and continue to firmly withhold their consent for the project. I got involved on Trans Mountain in 2012. I'm going to see if I can pull up the picture here. This is me. I can't believe how bad cell phone cameras were like 10 years ago, but this is me with my grandma. on her porch in North Burnaby, and my cousin, Connor. And we're not standing on apple crates. She really is. Well, actually, she's even smaller now. But she was concerned about the impacts of oil spills on all of her favorite seafood. And of course, like good sushi-loving grandsons, we both signed up for the fight. And both of us actually ended up working at Dogwood at various times over the years. So that's how I got involved back in 2012.
All right, I'm calling in today from Wissam, otherwise known as Roberts Creek on the Sunshine Coast. And I saw a friend just in the chat there popping in saying you're from the same spot. So yes, I'm calling from the territory of the Shisha and Squamish peoples. And I first got involved with the fight against the tar sands from much farther than Ground Zero in Coast Salish territory back in 2011. Protesting outside the Canadian Embassy in London, where I was living at the time, heavily involved with climate direct action groups like the Climate Camps and Rising Tide. And I've really been organizing against the tar sands ever since, and since pipelines in BC since 2013 when I moved back here. First doing Stop and Solidarity work in opposition to the Coastal GasLink pipeline. And soon after that, working with Georgia Strait Alliance and now Dogwood, focused mainly on Trans Mountain. So I love these photos because it's two different kids with me wearing the same coat, 5 years apart. So that's me and my first little boy on Burnaby Mountain in 2014, when there was a really big mobilization a while back now. And then that's me just a few weeks ago with my second little boy, visiting Timothy in the Tree out in the Brunette watershed. So it's been a long fight, and I know a lot of people in this call tonight will have been in it a long time too. But for me, without a shadow of a doubt, the thing that keeps me going and keeps me in it is just the real joy and the true power I see when our movement comes together in these moments of collective action. And it's it's what I love most.
Thanks, Alexandra. So I'm in recent months during COVID, I've been living as a settler on the unceded lands of the Lekwungen people. The word Lekwungen, which means place to smoke herring, unites the Esquimalt and Songhees peoples as one family. I thank the Lekwungen people for allowing us to live, work, and play on their lands and at the southern tip of Vancouver Island, otherwise known as Victoria. It's an absolutely stunning area to be in, and I want to acknowledge the ancestors, the hereditary leaders, and the matriarchs of these nations for being stewards of this beautiful land for so many thousands of years. So my story about pipeline activism, when I came to Dogwood as a volunteer 8 years ago, people were outraged about another pipeline, the Enbridge Northern Gateway project. Many of you on this call will have fought in that battle as well. So we've been at this for a while. That battle was a time of huge growth for our movement and for Dogwood. But it was our Indigenous allies who saved the day with a historic court victory. The Enbridge fight was a long, drawn-out battle, and we all breathed such a huge sigh of relief when it finally was over. We could hardly believe it, actually. And fast forward to today on Trans Mountain. First Nations have fought dozens of long and costly court battles, and hundreds of interveners worked for years to build their cases to present to the National Energy Board. Remember the NEB hearings? It's just hard to believe that we did all that, and so many people worked so hard on that just for naught. In fact, when I think about the tens of thousands of hours, mostly volunteer hours, that have gone into this battle to oppose Kinder Morgan and now Trans Mountain, the tenacity of the people dedicated to this work, it's just such a testament to the human spirit. So yeah, when you've been in, as Alexandra was saying, when you've been in a battle for a long time, it can be really hard to stay positive and engaged. But it kind of brought to mind when I was thinking about this, something that my friend Catherine Moss said in our Victoria team meeting a couple of weeks ago, and that was, remember, we're water on a stone. We're water on a stone. And it's an analogy that it really kind of helps me. Like we will win this one way or another. It's just a matter of time. And sometimes unexpected opportunities arise, and we want to make sure that we're ready to we're ready to meet those opportunities. Yeah, over to you, Kai.
Well, let's bring up the results of that first survey just to get a sense of where people are joining from. So a lot of people coming from Vancouver Island. That's great. We'll have some links. There are people asking already about what you can do if you're not on the ground in Burnaby or in the Lower Mainland, but we'll also look at opportunities right across the province. We're seeing lots of people joining from the Lower Mainland and even a few people from outside of BC, so welcome. As we saw last winter with the RCMP tactical teams raiding Wet'suwet'en territory, very powerful solidarity actions can be organized almost anywhere. And so there may be a need very soon to support people close to where you live. But let's start with the big picture, and then we'll fly over the Trans Mountain route. We'll look at different flashpoints along the way and get a sense of what is happening today and in the days to come on the ground. So Alexandra, do you mind giving us a sense of just why Trans Mountain is so desperate to build and why they're rushing to get as much done as they can this year?
Honestly, that question literally keeps me up at night because I can't figure it out. You know, there's never been fewer reasons to press ahead with this project. There are literally no good reasons left, and that's really what has consolidated over the last year. We've seen this growing consensus around just how broken the economic case for Trans Mountain is. This is supposed to be a project in the national interest. All these things were dismissed. If it was for the economy, we were going to go ahead with this project anyway. And that case has absolutely collapsed in this past year. I think COVID, we're looking at these headlines here on your screen, is just hastening a transition that even mainstream forecasters and, oil majors like BP and Shell are acknowledging, seeing that they're seeing the end of oil ahead and they are making that transition. We've got tech drawing out of its, pulling out of its big tar sands mine. We've got investors taking huge losses in the tar sands. And really this consensus that this transition is here and who is going to win and lose, and Canada, by doubling down, is really set to lose rather than win in this. So Trans Mountain project costs have been ballooning. The company isn't able to charge high enough tolls to the oil companies who ship on the line to cover construction costs. And it is us taxpayers who are going to be shelling out ever larger amounts to prop up this dying industry, as is the case on so many fossil fuel projects right now. Now, independent economists have been saying this for a long time, but what's happened this year is it's come out of the federal government's own agencies. The Parliamentary Budget Officer showed that in the majority of future scenarios that it modeled, Trans Mountain won't be profitable. And the Canada Energy Regulator put out a report showing that if Canada takes even the level of climate action we've already committed to, Trans Mountain pipeline capacity won't be needed. So this report really made the case. It made it clear that Trudeau can't claim climate leadership while building Trans Mountain. This has been even more highlighted with Biden's election and canceling Keystone. And the way, I see it, a number of allies who work more on the national front, making Trans Mountain the poster child for, Trudeau as climate laggard rather than climate leader is going to be a really important strategy in this election year. We've also seen another big warning sign about the risks of pushing ahead with Trans Mountain from insurance companies recently. At least 3 have dropped out from insuring Trans Mountain so far. And Trans Mountain has just in the last couple of weeks admitted in writing that it's struggling to find coverage, it's struggling to find insurers. And this pressure reached an all-time high after Indigenous youth occupied Vancouver offices recently, and we'll hear more about that later. But so much so, they're under so much pressure that Trans Mountain is trying to keep the names of its insurers secret. The fact that global finance companies don't want to be associated with Trans Mountain's toxic brand or such a risky sector overall is another clear signal that this is just a terrible bet for Canada and the federal government to keep gambling on. These risks are worsening as delays continue to pile up. We had a shutdown for 2 months that started in mid-December and carried on till roughly mid-February. And make no mistake, shutting down a project of this scale at this stage for 2 months, firing 3 of 7 contractors, 2 of whom still haven't been replaced. Like this is a very big deal, and it's going to add hugely to the costs. And I really don't think we've seen the full extent of the consequences of this shutdown being reported. And it looks to me like one more example where we have this kind of very secretive culture of a government-owned project really not showing the true challenges faced by this project. The worry is that they're going to be rushing, trying to meet this arbitrary in-service date of end of December 2022, potentially with more accidents and more risks. But on the flip side, it helps us to stay really crystal clear about the fact that this project is facing any number of very significant financial, operational, technical, reputational risks. And we need to keep that in sight rather than allow fatalism to creep in, that this thing is a done deal, which is certainly what the company wants you to believe. However, let's be real, despite all these risks and warning signs, Trudeau is pushing ahead, and the political and electoral efforts that so many of us have been involved in for so long really haven't changed that yet. So here we are, and all eyes are turning to the front lines. Even as we continue to make the case to Ottawa to cancel, the role of frontline resistance is absolutely critical in this chapter, because construction is happening, and Kai's going to give us an update on what's happening along the route.
Yeah, let's fly over. We'll start from the Alberta border and just give a sense of where some of the flashpoints are as we move our way back to the Lower Mainland. Thanks to Wilderness Committee for doing great work on route maps, as always. I'm in northern BC, so I've been trying to keep an eye on the northern part of the route, basically between the Alberta border and about Clearwater. So I've made a couple of trips this year, in the past year. And what we saw at first was a really big push under the COVID protocols. You know, this was out of sight, out of mind for most people in BC. So they were doing as much work as they could in the Fraser headwaters and the North Thompson. So driving along, you know, seeing the motels and the man camps just absolutely packed with Alberta license plates and contractors and white pickup trucks. And they really managed to make quite a bit of headway with the pump stations, the stream crossings. They were actually stringing pipe in Clearwater in the fall. And the whole route was just crawling with private security. That has mostly quieted down since that big safety shutdown. There's still some tree clearing crews that are working in Secwepemc territory in northern, the North Thompson. But by and large, the company has been in disarray in most of these areas of interior BC because they fired those contractors and released a lot of the heavy machinery that was leased for those sites. So that's good news for the moment. Let's look at some of the flashpoints along the route. So in Blue River, the Tiny House Warriors have managed to block construction of a big work camp on Secwepemc territory for the last 2 years. Down in Kamloops, another group of Secwepemc land defenders and allies took a stand at the Thompson River crossing, and the company made a big miscalculation, had to start over on the tunnel under the river there with additional delays and cost. South of Merritt, we've seen a long legal and procedural battle by the Coldwater First Nation to protect their aquifer, their drinking water. And Trans Mountain has been forced to reroute the project, again, causing more cost and delays. But at the same time, we've also seen land defenders, grassroots and Coquitlamach people active along the Coquihalla between Merritt and Hope. So moving down to the Fraser Valley, that's where you find the Sumath or Sumas First Nation. And they are defending a site called Lightning Rock. It's a sacred site in their oral history. That is also a mass grave for victims of a smallpox epidemic. And Trans Mountain had a big oil spill there that last year. They're also still cleaning that up while they're trying to make as much headway as they can on the Sumas tank farm. So another potential flashpoint in the Fraser Valley. And that really brings us back towards the Lower Mainland, which is where Trans Mountain is concentrating its construction efforts right now. So this could change, but right now, this is where we're seeing the most active resistance on the ground. And I wanted to take us to the Brunette River, and I'll ask you, Cheryl, just to give us an update on what's happening on the Brunette right now.
Yeah, sure. So many of you in the Lower Mainland were out there. Were out with us in August to tour the site. Last summer, Trans Mountain planned to clear trees in the sensitive watershed there, and they needed to do so during a so-called least risk to fish window established by the federal and provincial regulations, and that's attached to the project's condition of approval. So if Trans Mountain couldn't clear the trees by mid-September, they wouldn't be able to go ahead and return to construction until summer 2021. So it was a clear opportunity to create a significant delay. So on August the 3rd, Dr. Tim Tuccaro, many of you know Dr. Tuccaro. He's a public health doctor. He's an SFU prof. He was an expert in the NEB intervenor process. He went ahead and volunteered to occupy a treetop camp in a tree that was slated to be cut down. So in the days that followed, organizers got together and got tours happening in the area so that we could bring people in to, I don't want to take ownership. Dogwood was just one of many who did this work. But we brought people in to just really create awareness around the tree sit. And from that, a support camp grew on the ground. So after that, there was a succession of tree sitters, and the people who were supporting the camp came together under the new banner of Protect the Planet, Stop TMX. So since mid-December, another Timothy Gavare, has lived throughout the winter almost continuously 15 meters up in that tree. So it's an incredible feat. He's still there today. And together the tree sitters and their community of resistance have held strong and held off construction for 6 months in the Brunette. But in the last few weeks, Trans Mountain has shown that they're getting serious about working in the area. So they've been cutting beautiful old trees next to a carefully restored urban salmon river full of eggs. And it's clearly at the time of year that they promised they wouldn't work due to the risks to the fish and their habitat. So, really it's just so infuriating. We've between Trans Mountain breaking Burnaby City tree bylaws and ignoring provincial and federal regulations protecting fish. Basically, the regulators just letting them get away with it, and they're doing it in the name of the national interest. So yeah, we all know whose rights are being protected. Meanwhile, Timothy is still up in the tree. If you want to support these efforts, there's an email list hosted by Protect the Planet, Stop TMX for action alerts to hold space and defend the tree sit. And we'll share that in the follow-up email to this webinar so that you can sign up. And as we saw in today's flash march from the tree sit to the watch house in Burnaby up by the tank farm, there's a broad alliance that's come together around this activity in the Brunette. And which has in turn sparked and connected with other efforts here and throughout the Lower Mainland. The good news is that momentum is building in other areas along the route and around the province. So I'll pass it over to Alexandra for details of what's happening elsewhere.
Yeah, it's a great day to be doing this webinar because, yeah, today has been a really amazing day in right where we've just been talking about in this place. We've had actions all day long. All this different community of resistance that has grown up from this place and from all these different groups working together has really been out in force today. And I just want to really give you a flavor of some of these projects, some of these efforts and people, some photos, and most important of all, follow up with ways to get involved and really directly link up with these folks doing this amazing work. So first up, there's the 1308 Trees Project. That's the number of trees in Burnaby alone, larger than 20 centimeters in diameter, I believe. So there's plenty of trees, even greater than that number, that are going to be lost, that are smaller. And so 1308 Trees is a collection of artists and collaborators who are collecting portraits of the trees and sharing them online and giving the trees a voice by sending letters of protection to the Prime Minister and Trans Mountain CEO Ian Anderson. I know that the artists and their partners on this project need more help on the website side of things, getting all these amazing photos and letters coming in up on the website. If that's your cup of tea, that's a great thing that can be done from anywhere to support. Next up, we've got pipeline tours. Most weekends since the holidays, there have been organized tours, primarily to the tree sit, but also to other sections of the pipeline route in the Burnaby area mainly, such as Stony Creek. And it's a really great entry point to have an organized meetup time and place, get to know other folks who want to do more of this kind of thing, chat about what's been happening. A lot of them have involved kind of, awareness raising events and sine waves before and after. And there's been really a strong appetite for more of these tours. And there are folks available to train people up and offer that support, but really it's about people who are able to bottom line some of these events. So that's another thing that people are looking for more help with running these tours. Moving a little bit out of, moving further down the route out to the south side of the Fraser, there is now a big drill pad on the south side there where Trans Mountain plans to tunnel under the most productive salmon river in the world. And that pipe would pop out on the north side at Colony Farm, which is a cherished public park in that area, where the company's been allowed to take over 10 acres of this park to turn it into a construction site for up to 2 years. And plans to start cutting down trees as early as this week. And the community's really come out in force around this place, again, this special place that is home to dozens of endangered species and has all kinds of other meaning in this local area. And what you're looking at there is an amazing event that happened on Sunday, where dozens of people just turned up and lined this road with this red rope of hope, kind of defending the park, expressing their hope for the future. And it was a really fantastic event. So we're hoping to see more of these kind of red lines and rope of hope things popping up. For people willing to be a bit more independent, there's Adopt a Pipeline, which is essentially a surveillance and monitoring project of the route. Again, this is happening mainly in Burnaby, where you can go out alone or with a friend, walk your section of the route, check for construction activity or Trans Mountain breaking its conditions and report back. That's how a lot of the mask violations and other kind of safety violations that have been reported out have actually been found initially. So that's another thing that's happening behind the scenes. But again, there's ways we can connect you with those folks organizing those types of efforts. Now, others are training and preparing for and taking direct action. A faith-based group has blocked the access gate off North Road, which is the entry to the tree sit, where the tree clearing machines need to access the work site. This photo is from last week, but the same group was out again this morning at the exact same spot and again getting in the way of this construction activity. We've also had all kinds of other blockades throughout the city away from this one site. And this is just sort of a flavor of them. We've got some organized by Extinction Rebellion. There's been a number of arrests on kind of a more individual basis where, individuals, friends, and affinity groups are getting together to do these kinds of actions, drawing attention and awareness to what's going on here in the Lower Mainland. Know Your Rights trainings are a great place to start if you're considering stepping towards this kind of action. Chris Hermes, who did a lot of the legal support work in 2018, recently ran one of these trainings, and hopefully there'll be another one on the calendar of those soon to consider signing up for. And yeah, to keep up, there is this stuff just popping off all the time, and I think what folks would really like to see is to keep this momentum up with a series of weekly actions, bringing together all the different groups who are active, in this effort. And there's a call out for all these groups to host these weekly actions. And literally just today, I heard word of a digital art build coming up where you can build art from home and then leading up to a series of coordinated banner drops and a red lined action inspired by that Colony Farm event planned for Victoria. So stay tuned, and we're going to be following up with all the ways to get involved with all of this exciting stuff.
Thank you, Alexandra. So up until this point, we've focused on the Trans Mountain route and Trans Mountain infrastructure, but another important thing to think about is actions that have been led by, up until now, Indigenous youth that are not necessarily tied to the pipeline route, which is, of course, wrapped in that legal injunction. So some of these actions have been artistic or ceremonial, like commemorating missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Some of them fall more in the category of mutual aid and community care, and sometimes they're directly confronting power. So a couple of weeks ago, we saw a group called the Braided Warriors, a collective of Indigenous youth from around Turtle Island, many of them students in Vancouver, and they started blocking the gate outside the West Vancouver mansion of Dave Lead, who's the president of Leadcore, which is one of the major TMX contractors and involved in some pretty heinous safety violations and COVID protocol not being followed. Not long after that, the Braided Warriors were at the Vancouver offices downtown of three major international insurance companies. So Liberty Mutual, Chubb, and AIG, who are insurers on the pipeline project. And they were in the middle of a peaceful prayer in the AIG lobby when about 70 police officers arrived and without warning started dragging them out by their hair, throwing them on the ground, One person had her forehead split open, and 5 youth had to get emergency medical care. And then just a couple of days after that, Stacy Gallagher was convicted and sentenced to 90 days in jail for leading, again, a peaceful prayer outside of the Trans Mountain Tank Farm. And the Crown is really trying to make an example of Stacy. They're throwing a much stiffer jail sentence at him than many of the non-Indigenous people who were with him or have also stood on the wrong side of the injunction line. And so the Braided Warriors blockaded the Port of Vancouver. They held the intersection of Clark and Hastings for a day and a night. They demanded Stacy's release. And when he was released, the police moved in at nightfall and grabbed 4 more people. But before they could fully clear the intersection, the action moved. The entire group went downtown to the police lockup, and they held an action outside until those 4 people were processed and released. So what we're seeing are distributed, fast-moving, peaceful actions from Indigenous youth that are not tied to the Trans Mountain route or any particular location. And for me, it brings up an echo of Idle No More and the Shutdown Canada movement that we saw in the aftermath of the Wet'suwet'en raid last year before, of course, COVID changed everything. Alexandra, I don't know if you remember the tenor in the House of Commons last February, but we were there in the middle of this national political crisis that was prompted by these solidarity actions. The BC legislature was shut down. The province was running out of police, and CEOs were screaming about trains full of oil and timber that couldn't get to the ports. So if there's anything that politicians fear and which is guaranteed to get their attention, it's Indigenous youth refusing to recognize their authority, refusing to recognize the jurisdiction of police and politicians on stolen land, and reminding them of the fragility of this colonial resource extraction project. So these actions in particular are absolutely vital to support because they have very high impact, but they also come with high risk to the youth themselves because of the racism built into our police forces and our prison system. If these youth have to face police alone, we know what happens. They get badly hurt. And if non-Indigenous people are there, the police tactics change. It's just a fact. I wish that wasn't how the world worked, but it is. And so there are many ways to support the Braided Warriors and Indigenous youth. You can follow them on social media if you haven't already. They're putting a call out right now for supporters and allies with specific skills and supplies. And you can amplify and share their actions and donate to them on PayPal. But the time is going to come again when Indigenous youth are engaged in peaceful ceremony on unceded land and police are closing in around them. And in those moments, we cannot let them stand alone. We have a duty to bear witness and to do what we can to prevent harm to Indigenous people by our colonial institutions. Because thanks to Trudeau, it's our pipeline and it's our tax dollars paying for those police. And so sometimes that means that non-Indigenous people have to get between our police and the brave Indigenous youth that are leading these actions.
Yeah, thanks, Kai. It's pretty sobering. And, you know, so as always, Dogwood will be sure to keep identifying opportunities for you all to keep the pressure on Ottawa to cancel this project. But in this chapter where the frontline fight is absolutely critical, you know, what are we doing? How can we contribute? So far to date, we've been really focused on connecting our supporters, our volunteers to events that our allies are organizing. So inviting supporters on our email list to participate and recruiting volunteers to help out directly. Resistance efforts are not making the news, so we're also focused on storytelling from these events via social and mainstream media. And signal boosting to as wide an audience as possible. And then we've also been supporting from behind the scenes wherever appropriate. But the next thing that we're doing to just sort of lead off of you know, what Kai was introducing there is developing a rapid response team of Dogwood volunteers so that we're able to respond to calls like those put out by the Braided Warriors in recent weeks. And you know, there are people who obviously will just step out and do that kind of thing on their own. We know from just our organizing work that people feel safer when they're prepared and when they work as a team. So what we're going to be doing is building up this group of people who are interested in being ready to answer a call if they happen to be available when they come out. Very often it's on very short notice. And in advance, those people that are hand raisers for this kind of work will make sure that they meet together, that they connect with each other and have some community in their group, that they're properly trained so that they know how to stay safe and, you know, what are their rights in a protest situation and how to best act to safeguard the safety of Indigenous peoples who we know are really not, their interests are not at the hearts of law enforcers often. Sadly, and I've heard some pretty nasty stories about what's happened in these recent events, and largely it was because there were a few settler people who were out there trying to bear witness, but very few, and the police hugely outnumbered them. So this is why this is why we feel strongly that this is something that many of our people will be happy to do. And we'll be working to put this team together. And for those who would want to support in this way, but they live, elsewhere, or they're otherwise physically unable to join, we're also going to be setting up a rapid response calling team. So as mentioned, the media isn't covering these events. They're not getting, if they get any coverage, it's poor. The police are stepping in, and we need as citizens to be weighing in support of and defense of in this case these Indigenous youth. So we'll be setting up this calling team. The action would be to phone blitz key targets. So for example, making sure media are covering a story, demanding accountability from police departments as was necessary at the AIG confrontation, calling on regulators to enforce safety violations. So this is something that really citizens can step up and do, and need to step up and do. So we want to enlist a team of people who are ready to do this kind of work, so that when we go out with the information that's needed on short notice, that team is ready to take action and committed to doing that work. I often hear volunteers say they care deeply about reconciliation, like how do we do it? What are some actions that we can actually take? So this seems like a very low barrier way of just being available to bear witness, to make sure that we're standing in solidarity and not putting ourselves in danger, just being there in a way that will protect just by our very presence, either in person or through these phone actions. So so finally, so that's something that we're going to be working on in the next days and weeks. And then finally, we're going to be continuing to channel your outrage to where it belongs, which is to the politicians who hold TMX's fate in their hands. In this case, that means the Trudeau Liberals. And we've got some fun ideas planned for around the federal Liberal convention that's coming up in early April. So we'll be able to share these very soon. Volunteers will be trained to do this work, and this is work that can be done remotely. So stay tuned for more details on our plans to do some work with around the Liberal convention.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. So we are going to get into Q&A very soon. I did want to put up another survey just to get a sense, after hearing sort of the broad spectrum of what has been going on so far, what you might be interested in supporting. And you can select multiple answers here, so you don't have to just pick one. Just give us a sense of which of these types of activities you would be willing to undertake in the fight to stop Trans Mountain. So I'm going to pass it over to Alexandra for a final summary and a call to action, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A. So you can see there's a Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen or in your Zoom controls, and please feel free to put your questions in there, as well as to upvote questions from other folks so that the ones that are the highest priority for the most people get answers tonight. So over to you, Alexandra.
Thanks, Guy. Yeah, I just kind of wanted to bring us back to a few big picture takeaways. First of all, despite what Trans Mountain is oh so good at feeding to the oh so willing national media, this thing is not a done deal. That's what we're hearing tonight. It faces huge ongoing risks and delays. Construction is still stalled in many places. They have to reroute some sections and do new hearings there. They've encountered major geotechnical problems and they are very likely to do so again. They're floundering to find insurance coverage. And of course, there are all you amazing folks out there and all these amazing land defenders out there who are literally getting in the way of construction. So this thing ain't over. And for those of you on the call who are a little more familiar with the kind of political strategies for stopping this pipeline, I wanted to take a last minute to reflect on why this frontline fight is needed now more than ever and needs your support now more than ever. And we've heard some of that from Cheryl and Kai. But you know, first of all, I think this stuff is actually causing material delay. Like we are slowing this thing down. What the folks who have been out in the Brunette week and day upon day and the people out there today and everywhere else are doing is cumulatively slowing this thing down. It's gumming up the works. Even if trees are being cut down, it's taking longer in the Brunette watershed because folks are there, because they're watching, because they're blocking, they're drawing attention. And it's happening way slower there than it's happening in other parts of the route, like the parts Kai was talking about, you know, out of sight, out of mind for us, you know, lower mainland folks. So that's a really important thing to know. This is actually slowing things down, and we absolutely need to claim every single delay as a win because it is. This is how these pipelines have been stopped before, and it's how we're going to do it on this one. And I also think it's really clear from this overview tonight that these place-based fights create such powerful ripple effects that you just can't measure. There are so many people newly engaged or brought back into this campaign because they're seeing others taking a stand. They're visible, they're out there, you know, and it just, in turn, these people are bringing their friends and neighbors, and they're all doing the kind of more traditional tactics as well in ways that they haven't been for a while. And we know politicians are hearing this and taking note of this kind of resurgent opposition. It's like the beautiful opposite of fatalism, a kind of flywheel that once it gets started, it generates its own internal force and momentum that just keeps growing. So it's so powerful, and it's brought so much energy to me personally and to all of us. And yeah, it's going to keep growing. I just know it. And of course, as Kai was saying, we can't underestimate what these flashpoints could lead to politically as well. And here I think we can also take inspiration from what's happening right now with Indigenous-led resistance on Line 3 in Minnesota. I mean, building Trans Mountain is a finely calibrated political calculation, and Trudeau's behind it until the second the math changes. And then he's not anymore. Why would he be? So the economic risks, that the climate problem, the insurance campaign, all of this that we've all been working on and so many people are working hard on, this is leading him towards this off-ramp on Trans Mountain. And a major and sustained resistance flashpoint really could be the thing that tips the scales and makes him takes that off-ramp that is waiting for him on this project. And then, of course, for me, there's a whole other way to look at this that is completely aside from the impacts of the outcome on Trans Mountain that is so important, even more important in many ways. There are people out there who are putting their bodies on the line. They're risking their liberty, their health, and so much more to defend our home, to defend this place that we love and our future. And if we aren't able to do those kinds of actions ourselves, it is really our responsibility as the people who care about this issue, about climate, who have been in this fight for so long, to find every single way we can to make sure that the actions of those out there count, that they count when they are taking these kinds of risks. And when it's Indigenous people who are enacting their right to be and stand up on their own territory, and they're enacting their sacred responsibility to defend their lands and waters, and then they face that violence and racism of policing and courts as a result, you know, our responsibility as settlers to show up in every single way we can is only so incredibly heightened. So here we are, it's now or never. You know, we've held the line on this pipeline for a decade, but construction's happening. It's happening in our backyards. This fight is real now. It's come down to the ground and it is up to us. And I'll go back to a favorite quote that many of you will have heard before, but remember, this is a pipeline that goes from A to B. It needs to be complete to do its job. We only need to stop it in one place And we've done our job. It can't do its job, and it can't function. And just seeing the photos coming in from, all day long from 6 a.m. through till right now, where folks are gathering at the Watch House and a sacred fire is burning, when I can kind of see and feel and hear the power of our movement, even from here on the Sunshine Coast through a computer screen, I know we can do it. And I know we can stop this pipeline with this power of this movement we've got.
Thank you, Alexandra. And I will also echo that and mention that the vaccine schedule and the warmer weather is giving me a lot of hope in terms of just the ability of people to safely come out of their homes, meet face to face, work together, and actually find that spark that has been missing for so many of us as we stare at our Zoom screens, which hopefully won't be for too many more months. So we are going to get into Q&A soon, but first I just wanted to bring back the results from the second survey that we ran, just to get a sense of where folks are at. And it looks like a lot of people are looking for more information. Fair enough. There's a lot to digest. There's a lot to learn, especially if you are stepping into out of your comfort zone or into new kinds of actions. And so we are here to be a portal to those kinds of resources, to find you the information that you need and put you in touch with people who do have the answers if we can't. But I noticed there's a big number of people who are interested in joining a rapid response team to bear witness on the ground when possible, and even more people who are willing to join a phone calling team when those moments come, to put pressure on our institutions quickly via telephone, and quite a bit of support for other options as well. So really glad to see that level of engagement, and I wanted to head over and start answering some of your questions. So there have been some really good questions in the chat. I will go back through and try to pull some of those out. But if you do want to put your question into the Q&A panel, we'll start there. So Alexandra, this is a tough one, and Cheryl, you might want to weigh in as well. But Trudeau and the finance minister have talked about selling this pipeline to Indigenous people, to First Nations. And I want to get a sense of how real you think that is, and what the implications could be if the federal government manages to sell the whole project to a First Nations consortium.
Yeah, it is a tricky one. I think it is real. I think this is something that the federal government intends to try and make happen. They've put out tenders for financial advisors to, advise this process. So I think the intention is there on the part of the federal government. I think the question is whether the buyers will be there and whether the financing will be there. So whether there is one of these consortium of Indigenous, groups will come together and pull the trigger and actually choose to try and pull this off and buy this thing, and whether or not they can find the investment money. Those are where the question marks certainly hang. I think, the kind of risk stuff that we've been talking about today make it pretty unlikely that there will be, the kind of capital, the kind of money investment that is going to show up. Kinder Morgan walked away because they could see the writing on the wall. We just talked about how many other, in this sector are seeing that writing on the wall. So I think there's a big question around risk and whether the finance will be there. And of course, the trickiest part of the question really is, the Grand Chief here has talked about this as another smallpox blanket. Trying to offload this incredible gamble, this incredible risky project that right now Canadian taxpayers collectively bear the risk for, onto Indigenous peoples who have suffered so much at the hands of this colonial state is so egregious. It's so unbelievable to imagine that is what this Liberal government is trying to do. And it's tricky, and it remains to be seen really how those negotiations go, and how Indigenous communities have to talk amongst themselves to figure out whether this is something that they are going to go for or not. And there are so many who are withholding their consent. There's a long road for something like that to actually materialize. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would just only add that I think, what you mentioned about the analogy of the smallpox blanket, that's definitely in our volunteer circles. That's the way people are looking at this, as the government, just wanting to pass off a bad deal, pass it off. And we can see the writings on the wall for this extra crude oil, right? There's no market for it. There's no future for it. Like, why would we, in good faith, like make Indigenous nations even willingly that, the front people for this project. But then also my understanding is that the money would come from the Canadian government. They would be the financiers of this. Rightly or wrongly, it was my understanding. And it seems like it's an underhanded trick.
Yeah, and it highlights again the importance of getting the information out there about the risk and about the delay for any investor, public, private, Indigenous consortium or Canadian taxpayers who are the owners right now. Another one about pipeline politics. How does the cancellation of Keystone XL affect the political calculus around Trans Mountain? Does it make it more or less attractive is the question.
I'll leave that to you, Alexandra.
More or less attractive to who? I mean, I think initially, we saw a big outpouring saying we need Keystone even more. That was, the oil industry's talking point with Keystone out of the picture. We're going to need Trans Mountain more. But the evidence from the regulator and from other forecasters really shows this isn't the case. We just don't need Keystone or Trans Mountain. So that kind of fact-based argument is often missing from this debate when pipelines have become such a political symbol. And, we have Jason Kenney and, all the rest of that crew wanting more pipelines, not just Keystone and Trans Mountain, but a whole other line down the way. I think it does in some ways make the fight harder, but that in some ways also was a media moment that has passed. And I think what the bigger issue and potentially the potential with that is Biden showing true climate leadership, right? Trudeau, as I was talking about before, he's tried to run on this for many years now and has occupied that space, and that wasn't difficult given given the president that the US had at the time. And that job of owning that title has become a hell of a lot harder now that Biden is in office. And we know that Trudeau cares about his international reputation. He was back on the international stage and he takes great pride in that. And I do think there's a lot of opportunities with international pressures now that Biden is in that, claiming the crown of climate leader.
There's a good comment from Lorinda in response to the question about the project being sold to other First Nations, which is that whoever buys the project, they don't have a say over the territories of, for example, the Tsleil-Waututh or the Squamish, or it's not an averaging exercise. You can't say, well, a certain percentage of First Nations in this column support it and others don't. It's about the territorial rights that each nation holds over their part of the world. And so, yeah, just because the ownership could transfer to nations in Alberta or Saskatchewan doesn't mean that they have a right to violate the consent of Indigenous nations here in BC. There's a question from Peter around banks. And so, of course, the Canadian taxpayers are the funders of this project. But I think the question is getting at whether there's any banks or financial institutions that could remain targets for pressure, even though the bulk of the construction money is coming from us. Are there other financial institutions that could be targets?
Potentially, and I think that comes down to the buyer, right? So whoever a potential future buyer, if they ever get to that point, because the government's been clear that they won't sell until it is de-risked, i.e. it is complete. So this, I think again, it's about continuing to raise that risk profile, and that achieves so many of our objectives by making that risk more known. In that those banks will be the ones stepping up with investment capital for whoever may be involved in a future purchase, and making those banks stay away, making sure that they aren't offering that money up is really important. They're running incredibly successful campaigns on the Defund Line 3 campaign, keeping, getting the big American banks to stay away and divest and that kind of thing. And it's harder on this campaign, there's no doubt about it, now that it's federally owned, because it's a future strategy. It's not about right now on Line 3, if the banks walk away, it's a cleaner way to kill that project than we have available to us with the banks, because it's about future risk rather than cancellation right now. But I do think there's potential there, and there's certainly been lots of conversations lately with allies in the US who are doing such great work on the bank campaigns down there.
There's a question in the Q&A around politicians and political parties, where they stand. and whether we should give our political support to politicians who take a stand on Trans Mountain. I think it invites another question, which is where the heck are our politicians? So, you know, 3 years ago, we saw members of parliament from 2 different political parties facing arrest at the Trans Mountain tank farm. What's the state of play right now with our federal and provincial political parties?
I can dive in unless either of you want to say something as well.
Go ahead, jump in. I'll add in a second, but yeah.
I mean, the state of play is not too dissimilar, right? We have, you know, federal conservatives, more pipelines, build them. We have the federal liberals who are, you know, bought this project. The NDP federally is opposed. They have said that they think it was a bad decision. You know, we have some fantastic allies and champions in the form of Peter Julian and Laurel Collins, who take every opportunity to stand up in the House and talk about the cost issues and raise the risks and the climate issues. You know, so they're speaking out all the time. I'd certainly like to hear more of that coming from Jagmeet Singh and from the leadership, and you know, a stronger priority out of the federal NDP on this, particularly in this election year. And the Greens remain firmly opposed. Elizabeth May, you know, a huge champion on this campaign, and with a new Green leader, I think there's open question, right, about how strongly prioritized this will be amongst the federal Greens. So that's my, like, very quick lightning tour. I don't know what both of you might like to add to that.
Oh, I think you about summed it up. Yeah. There's another question here from Monica about selective police enforcement, and what are we to make of you know, Trans Mountain breaking the law and facing no consequences, while opponents are heavily penalized, and Indigenous opponents even more so. What does this tell us about our police?
I'm gonna tap you in, Kai.
Well, I think it shows quite clearly that the job of police is to protect private property, right? It's not about, they're not an institution of justice. They are an institution that is, in the case of the RCMP, founded to protect and expand the corporate colonial state, and in the modern context to protect private property. So the reaction of the Vancouver Police Department to peaceful Indigenous youth in the lobby of an insurance building is on par for what police are designed and historically founded in order to do. Where this clashes with Indigenous law and governance is that these territories were never sold or surrendered or conquered. And so the land that is claimed both by the Crown and by private companies like Trans Mountain is contested land. It is land that is not private property under Indigenous laws. And so that's why you're seeing this clash of worldviews, where Indigenous youth are saying, we don't recognize your jurisdiction or authority, and the cops are saying, you're violating you know, trespassing laws, or you're on private property, and we see the violence that results from that. So yeah, I would just say don't get it mixed up. Police are not there to protect you or your rights. They're there to protect private property and the Crown. We have a question from Carl. What do you think of the coverage, and I guess he means news coverage, of the dangers at the tank farm, the tree sits, and yeah, where do you see you know, gaps in the media coverage, and who's doing a good job?
I see a lot of gaps. It's been increasingly difficult to get, particularly national media. You know, conflict and protest on the ground in BC remains sometimes interesting to BC-based and Vancouver-based media, but you know, the fact that this project was shut down for 2 months, and the fact that that's got to have added, you know, billions of dollars to the construction cost, and you just have radio silence. I think there is a consensus among the liberal media that this thing's a done deal and they're not going to report on it. So that is a huge challenge. We know how much that counts nationally. So that is a big challenge for us to face. And in terms of protests and actions, and, you know, just seeing it all come together in photos tonight. And I saw people as we were sharing those photos saying, why have I not heard of this? Where are the cameras? Where is this coverage not coming through? You know, it's pretty awful to see. There are some outlets who do a great job. Vice Canada recently has done some great pieces. The Tyee, there are outlets who are doggedly following the story. The Narwhal, the Observer, who can be counted on to make sure that people are hearing this story. So definitely follow all of them if you're not already. but in terms of, the mainstream outlets and the ones that the lion's share of British Columbians are watching at 6 and 11 each night, they're not telling this story. So that is one of the reasons we've been considering more of this kind of calling campaign to make sure that that gets heard more, as it should.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something that I would add there too is for a segment of the population that is not on, they don't agree with Facebook, they're not on social media. A lot of the way that we try to get the word out on this kind of activity it's not reaching people. So there's a void there for sure. And I know it's something that we at Dogwood and other small groups are working hard to try to address, but it's a real problem. And that's where this this team of callers, we could start to put pressure on some of our mainstream media outlets and, continually just be asking them, why aren't you covering this local issue? It's a really important issue to people who live here. I want to see it in my news coverage.
Yeah, and we do have our own infrastructure and communications networks. So we are coming up on the top of the hour, and we promise people this will be 1 hour, but there's still more questions to answer. So I wanted to see if you folks would be willing to stay on for another 5 minutes or so, just to get a few more questions answered. Okay, so for people who do need to jump off, if you want to stay in the loop about how to support frontline efforts, and especially to receive email notifications to events along the route, I want to let you know you can sign up for Dogwood's TMX Frontline Alerts. We're going to put the link in the chat here. And if you're organizing an event, you can email any of us and we will try to amplify, because we do have a large email list and social media channels. And so we don't want to miss grassroots events that are popping up. So all three of us are easy to get in touch with, but Alexandra or Cheryl, if you wanted to drop your work email in the chat, very excited to support other groups, especially new and emerging groups that are forming in response to Trans Mountain's ramped up construction activity. So we'll say goodbye to a few folks who do have to drop off, but let's take a few more questions before we wrap up for the night. And so one of these is around, there's a couple around oil demand. And Charlie says, a common argument that I hear from proponents of Trans Mountain is that the oil has already been produced, and this will just sort of increase the price that we get for that oil, or the capacity to transport the oil safely. Is there any truth to that? And how do you argue against that when people try to disconnect these expansion projects from increased oil production?
Yeah, there's a couple of key talking points that have been really sticky, that, again, I think often are based on old evidence. So that is kind of my first piece, is go back and get the facts. These myths have been really thoroughly debunked many times over, but they have stuck in the national narrative. They remain on the lips of the industry and of politicians. But the kind of myth of Asian markets, the myth of this price differential, the fact that we're not making, that we'd be making more money if it was if we could get this pipeline to Tidewater. They're like religious statements by this point, and there's no one's fact checking anymore. And so much of this is based literally on 8-year-old data, and the world has changed so fundamentally from them. But the national interest case and the approval is all resting on economic analysis from a single source, largely from 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. So that's kind of my top headline message, is let's remember how much our economy has changed and how much circumstances have changed in that intervening era, especially this year. So that is, that's how I talk to people about it. We had a day where oil prices were negative in the last year. They couldn't give it away. They had to pay to get it taken away. The world is changing so quickly. And this project is locking us into a dinosaur past rather than the future we're trying to move towards. So I talk about how fast the world is changing and how outdated the information that these decisions are based on is really, unfortunately, so old.
A related question from Penny about the PR response from oil producers in the aftermath of the Texas winter storms and the power being knocked out, trying to use fossil fuels as an argument for like a more stable power grid or more stable energy in an era of climate disaster. I don't know if we could probably spend an hour on this cynical new development in disaster capitalism. But if any of you wanted to say anything about oil companies trying to use the climate crisis as an argument for more dependence on fossil fuels.
Yeah, well, I guess we can just get ready for a lot more of that, you know, as we get more and more of these climate disasters, you know, that unusually cold snap in Texas. I mean, that just, you know, it overpowered the grid. If you look at any energy experts' analysis of what happened, it's absolutely because of it was an extreme weather event that they were not prepared for. So, but yeah, prepare for more of this kind of co-opting of the message by the oil and gas interests to make sure that they're gonna be fighting tooth and nail to survive and or to retain their power. And as we go further into extreme climate weather events, you know, there'll be more of what we saw in Texas.
Question in the chat about a snap federal election. So how do you see this unfolding if the federal government goes for another majority at some point this year? How does Trans Mountain play into a federal election?
It's a good question. And those of folks on the call who have fought federal elections, you know, with us in the past, we have to be clear about how, you know, how much TMX is going to rank and rate in a pandemic year as a federal election prior, especially in the last, you know, in the 2019 one that was so very recent. But Trans Mountain, I think making Trans Mountain part of that climate debate is going to be really important, forcing Trudeau to wear his choices on Trans Mountain rather than coast on his climate credentials. So I think there are certainly opportunities in terms of narrative, in terms of media, in terms of making sure that Trans Mountain is showing up in every question that it gets asked about climate change, I think is one of the best opportunities in a federal election scenario. But Cheryl, you can offer more in terms of, writing based, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of great ideas. You know, the Liberals look like they're waltzing into a majority situation, and yeah, I don't have any. Yeah, there's some things being talked about, but nothing super promising at the moment, sadly.
Bear in mind how quickly the world changes, right? 1 year ago, we thought we had a pretty good idea of how 2020 was going to unfold. And yeah, there are some seismic shifts that could yet happen in Canadian politics and in the climate fight that could completely change the political math around projects like Trans Mountain. I, for one, would not bet against the ability of high school students and Indigenous youth to completely change the political calculus on climate. A couple of quick questions and then we're going to wrap it up for the evening because I'm seeing people dropping off. Cynthia asks if there's any plan of action when the tree sit is being threatened. Folks are interested in supporting Timothy. What's the timeline on that, and what's the rough plan if they try to cut that tree down?
Yeah, the timeline is any day now, but it has been any day now for quite some time. You can kind of see in some of those photos I shared, you know, they're working their way from North Road along that road through the watershed, through the greenway to where the current tree sit is. But they're going really slowly. So it could be days yet, it could be longer. So it's kind of a wait and see. So Protect the Planet, Stop TMX has an action alert system set up for exactly this purpose. So that would be the place to sign up so that when there is a call to come and support and defend the tree sit, you will get that right away directly from them. If we have one more question, I will go and try and find that sign up page right now. And obviously we'll make sure to share that with you in the follow-up email later this week.
There was another quick question just around the global climate strike activities coming up on March 19th. Have we heard of anything specific happening in BC around March 19th?
I haven't.
No,
but I do know that there are these ideas for weekly actions, and it does ring a bell that perhaps something could be happening on that day as a result of that being a targeted day for action.
Oh, I think was it sustainability teams? Do we hear? I think it's a youth-led thing.
Okay. If we do hear about anything, we'll include that in the follow-up email as well. So you'll have a little mini calendar of things coming up in the very near future. I think it is time to say goodnight to folks. XR might be planning something for the 19th. Thank you for that in the chat. We want to thank you all for attending. We had, I think at our peak, about 160 people on the line. Jimmy could confirm, different folks coming and going. So thanks so much for your interest tonight. And we want to, yeah, wish you all good health and safety. If you are venturing out from your COVID cave to get a look at what's going on the ground. And I have to say, there's just no substitute for seeing what's happening with your own eyes. And yeah, it changes you. Like, it changes the viewer. The person bearing witness is changed by being there and by being in that relationship with people who are taking those risks. And yeah, as Alexandra said earlier, this creates a flywheel of momentum. And right now, what we're looking at, I think, is sort of the early stages of a kind of spring in British Columbia that I hope leads to some much bigger events and actions. And we'll be sure to let you know about how you can support those as we hear about them. Any final words from Cheryl or Alexandra?
I just want to say thank you for all the thank yous in the chat. And there were a couple of people, I think, worrying about getting the information, and we will follow up tomorrow with all the contact information, so you'll have those all the contacts that we've talked about.
I just wanted to add, obviously, thanks to everyone for joining the call, and for all of you for everything you've been doing, and in particular those, you know, out in the Brunette today, and everyone who is bringing so much fire to this and throwing down so hard to stop this pipeline. All you fabulous organizers have my gratitude and respect, and can't wait to do more with you all as we go forward into this new spring that Kai's calling down for us.
All right, thanks, folks.
Great to be together. Thanks, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.